There's a version of this idea that circulates widely. Pain is preparation. Your suffering has a purpose. What's breaking you is building you. I've said variations of that. I've meant them. And I've also said them when what I really wanted was to offer someone comfort faster than the truth could arrive. There's a difference between those two things, and you can feel it, even when you don't name it. What I want to try today is the accurate version, not consolation, explanation. What's actually happening when the three things I'm about to describe start showing up in your life, and why each of them, despite looking like evidence that something is deeply wrong, is actually a signal that something larger is in motion. Jung spent decades observing people at the threshold of genuine psychological transformation. He called the process individuation, the movement toward becoming fully and specifically who you actually are. And he was unusually honest about what that process costs. In the 17th volume of his collected works, The Development of Personality, he wrote, "The development of personality is a favor that must be paid for dearly, not metaphorically. The specific capacities that emerge from real psychological growth, the ability to be present under pressure, to feel deeply without being swept away, to hold your own ground without needing to announce it, can't be installed from the outside. They can only arrive through the weight that most people are trying to get out from under." But here's what the inspirational version usually skips. Jung was specific about this. The preparation doesn't feel like preparation. It feels like dismantling. The process that's building something new does it by taking apart something old. And the taking apart, the losing of ground, the collapse of what used to hold, is what you're living through when you're inside it. That changes what the pain means while you're inside it. The first sign is a collapse of tolerance. Things you used to manage, with some version of effort and equanimity, start becoming genuinely impossible. Relationships that once felt merely difficult become unsustainable. Versions of yourself that fit certain roles, in families, at work, in old friendships, stop being available. The energy you used to marshal for accommodation has simply stopped showing up. The natural reading of this is deterioration. You're getting worse, more fragile, less functional. But what Jung's framework suggests is different. A psyche engaged in real transformation can't simultaneously hold what it's becoming and what it used to be. The old capacity, the ability to absorb endlessly, to adapt, to perform whatever version of yourself the environment has required, isn't disappearing because something's failing. It's being cleared because what comes next requires a different interior architecture. You can't keep the old configuration running and install the new one at the same time. What the collapse of tolerance is actually signaling is that the psyche has already made a decision the conscious mind hasn't been fully informed about yet. A threshold has been identified. The preparation is choosing before you've consciously chosen yourself. This is the part that's nearly impossible to see from the inside, because from the inside, it doesn't look like clearing. It looks like loss. And the loss is real. Something that used to be available to you no longer is. What's hard to hold during that is the idea that the loss and the preparation might be the same event, wearing different faces depending on which direction you're looking from. The second sign is harder to name, and probably the one most often missed. You start asking for the first time in a long time, or maybe for the first time in your life, what you actually want. Not what makes sense, given everything you've built. Not what the people around you need from you. What you specifically want. It sounds like a simple thing. It isn't. Not for the kind of person who has spent most of their life with their attention organized around what other people need. That question isn't accessible in ordinary circumstances. There's always something more immediately necessary. The want doesn't get asked, because there's never a gap in the external demand large enough for it to surface. What pain does, and this is the mechanism Jung pointed at when he described the unconscious using crisis as its instrument, is withdraw the available energy from that outward direction. The capacity for endless accommodation depletes, and in the depletion, for the first time, there's space. And in that space, something quieter surfaces. What do I actually want? Not as performance, as a real question, arriving for the first time with enough room to wait for an answer. I spent 12 years in hospice care, and then 1 year I couldn't anymore. The capacity to hold other people's grief without drowning in my own had reached its end. I left thinking something fundamental had broken in me, that I'd failed at the thing I was built for, that I'd been, in some way I couldn't precisely name, simply used up. What I didn't understand yet was that the collapse of my ability to absorb wasn't the destruction of something. It was the beginning of a different kind of presence, one that could be with someone in their pain rather than inside their pain on their behalf. The taking on a tree, which I'd called empathy, which I'd built an entire professional identity around, had been a way of helping that also kept a certain distance. You're so inside the feeling you're carrying that you're not fully with the person you're sitting beside. I had to lose the old version to arrive at the one that was actually useful. I couldn't have seen that while it was happening. From inside, it felt like dismantling, because it was. The third sign is the most disorienting to live through and the clearest in retrospect. You start seeing something true about yourself that you've spent a long time not looking at directly, not as punishment, not as judgment, as information that has become available now in a way it wasn't before. The pain creates a kind of pressure that cracks the surface, and through the crack, something that was already there surfaces. Jung documented this in his own life with unusual precision, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, the memoir he wrote in his final years. He describes the period after his break with Freud, not as a time of discovery, but as a time of confrontation. What came up in that period? The visions, the interior voices, the material he couldn't categorize and couldn't dismiss, didn't present itself as insight or gift. It presented itself as what was actually there, underneath, that he'd been too occupied by external success and professional standing to look at clearly. He didn't learn anything he couldn't have learned before. He was forced to look at what had always been true, because the structures that had allowed him to avoid it had been removed. That's the third sign. A kind of involuntary clarity, not epiphany, arrival. Something you almost knew, half knew in certain lights but could set aside, finally becoming fully visible because the pain has stripped away the layers of functioning that were keeping it at a comfortable distance. For some people, it's the recognition that they've spent years offering their real gifts at a discount, minimizing what they're actually capable of to preserve a relationship or fit an expectation. For others, it's seeing clearly for the first time the pattern in who they keep choosing and why. For others still, it's something they've half known about themselves for years, a direction they've kept not quite committing to, a life that keeps surfacing in the quiet moments and then getting buried again. What's being revealed isn't new. It's been there. The pain created the conditions for it to be seen. Tedeschi and Calhoun, two psychologists who spent decades studying what they called post-traumatic growth, found something consistent across hundreds of cases. The people who experienced genuine transformation after significant suffering didn't grow because of the suffering itself. They grew because the suffering created a specific rupture in the assumptions they'd organized their lives around. That rupture forced reconstruction, and the reconstruction didn't restore what was lost. It produced something qualitatively different. Crucially, none of the people they studied could have predicted in advance what they were becoming. The growth revealed itself only through the process, only from the other side. That's the thing about preparation. It doesn't inform you. It works on you. Jung wrote in one of his later letters That the most disorienting feature of real psychological development is that you cannot see where it's going. You can only see afterward where it went. The extraordinary thing your pain is preparing you for isn't something that will arrive from the outside. It's something you're already being shaped into. The collapse of tolerance is the clearing. The emerging want is the first signal of direction. The involuntary clarity is the ground that's been revealed for building on. You don't have to know what it's preparing you for. The preparation doesn't require your understanding. It only requires that you stay present to what's actually happening, without reaching for a lesson before the process is finished, without demanding a preview of what you're becoming. Jung said it plainly, "There is no birth of consciousness without pain." He didn't say it as comfort. He said it as observation. Consciousness, the actual integrated, specifically yours kind, doesn't arrive without cost. The process knows what it's doing. That's the part that has to be trusted, especially when, maybe particularly when, it doesn't feel like anything except weight.